I'm Vance Bastian here with my co-host S.A. Baz Collins for this week's Written on the Edge Season 9 Episode 1 interview. And for those of you who've been following, this is our 500th episode. Woohoo!
Woohoo!
So we will be talking with Garrett Hutson, who has come back to share his latest works with us. So, for those of you who don't know him, Garrett writes upmarket mysteries and historical spy fiction, driven by flawed characters who are moving and unforgettable. He writes about ordinary people in different times and places who struggle with faith, family dysfunction, and all of the moral gray areas of life. It's realistic fiction, so Garrett's work is always diverse and LGBT inclusive. Garrett, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks.
So, for those who didn't hear a previous interview, can you just give us a real short, where did the passion to write come from? What was the spark?
It's always been there. When I was too young to even remember, I would always tell stories to my older cousins and act them out. And I would dictate things to my mom, or I just, even before I could actually spell, I would just write out a bunch of random letters and make my mom read it aloud. Um, God love her. She was a good sport. And these things were
Right.
unpronounceable. And she put in a good effort and we'd all end up giggling. So it's like even before I went to school, I had this impetus to write these things down. I don't know where that came from. It was
It's
just
in your
there.
blood.
And then in grade school, I think it was fourth grade, we had an author who came and talked to our class and talked about writing novels. And I thought, wow, that sounds like so much fun. And we had a young author contest that the school was part of. And so I entered a story and it won a prize and I was hooked.
Beautiful.
Hmm.
Beautiful, beautiful. So, on your last interview, you previewed the two topics or the two projects we're going to talk
Hmm.
about today. Pink Lotus is book 4 in your Shanghai Murder series.
Yes.
What should folks know about it? What's the elevator pitch before we dig in?
The elevator pitch is an odious little man gets thrown out of a window of a locked nightclub, and so there is a limited cast of suspects. And Doug Bainbridge's best friend, Stuart, is accused of the murder, and Doug has to figure out who actually did it.
Dun dun dun.
Dun dun dun. Yeah.
All right. So, since it's book 4, let's tell
Mhm.
people about Doug and how he got into investigation and why he's in
Okay.
Shanghai.
Yeah. So Doug is an intelligence officer with the United States Navy, and he was initially sent to Shanghai on an immersion to just learn Chinese language and culture in and out. But he ultimately ends up being stationed there with the Yangtze Patrol because the U.S. Navy had a permanent presence in Shanghai during the 1920s and 30s. It was called the Yangtze Patrol. It was there to kind of enforce the open door policy that we had with China and protect American shipping and all of that sort of thing. And so Doug gets to stay in Shanghai, which is just this great international setting. There were people there from every country imaginable. It was just an incredibly diverse place, very happening, very vibrant nightlife. And there's a lot of crime, which makes it great for mysteries. There's murder happening everywhere. So it
Awesome.
makes it good to have an ongoing series there. We'll put it
Oh,
that
yeah.
way. And so in the Pink Lotus, this is book 4, like I said, and Doug is still an intelligence officer with the Navy. The big change for him is that he and his wife Lucy welcome a new baby. They have a baby boy during the middle of the story that they named Danny. And Lucy's mother, Mrs. Kinsler, comes to stay with them for a while. She was kind of a fun little side character from the first book in the series, The Jade Dragon. And I got to experiment with her being even a little bit more annoying now that she's staying with Doug and Lucy and helping out with the baby and everything. And those were fun to write. But Shanghai being Shanghai, there is a murder. So Doug's friends take him out on a sort of stag night before the baby comes, and they go to this club. And it was a real life club called the Del Monte, kind of on the outskirts of Shanghai. And it was owned by an American with underworld ties. So, in addition to the usual drinking and dancing, there was also gambling going on. Shocking. Um, and everyone is locked in. Like I said, this is kind of a locked club. The reason for that was after the Japanese invasion, Shanghai put in a wartime curfew, and the nightclubs, you can't spoil the good time. So they just locked the doors at 10 o'clock and nobody could leave. And then they would open them up at 6 o'clock. And then everybody went out when the curfew was done because, can't stop the party.
So, did people literally party all night, or were there
Yes.
like bedrooms upstairs?
No, they partied all night and they served breakfast at 6
Wow.
a.m. when they opened the door. Fried eggs and bacon. Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah. Shanghai was such a cool little place. I mean, it's just carefree. And yeah, so there's a war
Just
going
pray
on
that
around
there's
us.
no fires.
Yeah, exactly.
That'd be my first thought. Holy shit. I'm in an oven.
Yep.
So,
Dangerous, definitely.
one of the things I latched onto when I read the synopsis was you've got a new character, a female impersonator.
Hmm. Yes.
Care to introduce us?
Panyan Tao, also known as Liu Fan when not in drag. And I do want to say, I think it's important to point out that I use drag queen standard pronouns. So she, her when it's Panyan Tao, but he, him when it's Liu Fan. This is a character who at the time period would have been viewed as a queer man dressing in women's clothes to pretend to be a woman. Um, so the term that is used most often is female impersonator because that's the term that was the most common at the time.
At the time,
Mhm.
right?
Right. And this is 1938. And this is a person that Nick Lockhart, who is our victim, was openly contemptuous of during the evening. And then, of course, he ends up dead. So Panyan Tao, did she do it? Maybe.
Suspect.
Suspect. Yeah. And she's very kind of acid tongued, which was fun to write because I got to be bitchy basically when I was writing those scenes. And let that out. And Doug, over the course of the investigation, has to have some very uncomfortable interactions with both Panyan Tao and Liu Fan. And that was kind of fun to explore too with his character development.
Nice. When
Mhm.
you're writing, do you voice your characters out loud, like the Penion's lines, like "Rawr."
Occasionally, I don't actually voice things out loud very often, but I can hear it in my head. And
Okay,
yeah, it's fun.
nice. Bez, do you have questions?
Well, I just, I my daughter actually did a film thing in Shanghai. So I love the fact that you have it based there because
Mhm.
with her documentary that she produced while she was there, I got to see a lot of the city. So, and I know it's
Oh,
very different
fun.
from what it was back then, but the ambiance is just, it's kind of like placing it in Chinatown in San Francisco here in the
Hmm.
States. So it's got that same kind of ambiance where the culture is, you're just literally immersed in the culture.
Oh,
And it's also interesting because Shanghai is different than most of mainland China, and people don't know that. The language is very different. They have
yes.
Shanghaiese,
Hmm.
which my daughter had to encounter because she was there on a one semester of schooling for her film degree, and they were out filming, and then the police would show up and they'd start talking to them, and she'd turn to her Chinese, students that
Hmm.
she's working with, and she's like, "What do they say? I don't know. I don't speak Shanghaiese." And so there's these barriers that you don't think of.
Hmm.
So how did you deal with some of that? Did you fold any of that into what Shanghai
Yeah.
is as a character itself?
Yes. So Doug comes into the series already speaking Mandarin and Cantonese,
Hmm.
which helps him a tiny little bit when he gets to Shanghai, because most of the people, as you said, speak Shanghainese, which is its own language,
Hmm.
different from both Mandarin and Cantonese. So part of his journey over book one is learning Shanghainese, but by the time we get to book four, he can speak it pretty well.
Oh, okay, okay,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, it's just those barriers that, and I think that's great for readers to be exposed to because
Hmm.
they don't anticipate that being something that will be a barrier to your characters. And I'm sure, like in the earlier books, did he struggle a lot with
Yes.
trying to have that dialogue with some people, or in order to dig for information or what have you?
Yes. So Shanghai had a pigeon, which certain words of which are now pretty common in English, like no can do, for example,
Uh-huh.
it came from Shanghainese pigeon. And most of the Westerners wouldn't learn any Chinese. They would just speak in pigeon to the Chinese folks. But Doug starts out, adamantly refusing to use pigeon. He's going to do whatever he can to speak as much Chinese as he can to folks.
Right.
So he kind of starts out using a weird combination of Mandarin, Cantonese, and if he knows the Shanghai word, he'll slip it in there. And over time, it becomes more Shanghainese. And there
Right.
is this kind of realization towards the end of the Jade Dragon where he's like, oh, I said that sentence in Shanghainese. You know.
Yeah. Okay.
Nice.
Cool. Yeah. And that's just great character touches, because
Hmm.
you said most Western readers would not even know that's a thing.
Right.
I didn't know about it until my daughter went there. She said, "Look, things get really crazy very fast."
Yep.
All right. Garrett, is there anything about the Pink Lotus I didn't think to ask that you want people to know?
Yeah, so there are new characters in the story. A lot of the returning cast from the earlier series is there. A lot of Doug's friends, both from the Navy and from civilian Shanghai. But I've got a few new characters. Like there's Dolores Moody, who's kind of this brashy former chorus line dancer who now is a paid dinner companion, who has had an altercation with Nick Lockhart before he gets thrown out a window. So she's a potential suspect. There's another jockey named Mark Chapman, who's a rival at the horse track. And then, like I said, Pan Yin Tao, who's just fun, lots of fun.
Awesome. 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 Are you going to keep going with the series?
I am, yeah. So I am actually currently working on book number 5.
Nice.
It is one of my kind of half finished projects from last year, and it's going to be the first one I'm going to finish up in 2024.
Awesome.
Yeah. So the working title is Murder Among Friends. Subject to change. I might keep it because I kind of like it, but I might not either. So those of us of a certain age probably remember a viral email from the late 90s that had all these pithy sayings in it. And one of those sayings was, friends help you move, but real friends help you move bodies.
Move the bodies, yeah.
Right. Right. Yeah. Mhm.
And that's all I'll say.
Okay. All right. All right. Excellent.
Love it. All right, well, on the tail of that teaser, then, let's hop over to Of Wild and Merry Men, a very
Yeah.
different book.
Yes.
What would you
Yeah.
like folks to know? Again, let's start with elevator pitch and then we'll dig in.
Okay. So this is the story of Noah Bancroft and Jimmy Hawkey set against the Merrymount Colony, which is a little known kind of utopian experiment in 1620s colonial New England. And it features a bunch of drunken revels and same-sex activity and angry Puritans.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
There's all the drama you need.
Yeah. Now,
So
like
how
Vance said, this is very different for me. It's
it
not a
is.
murder mystery. It's not a thriller, and it's one I kind of struggled with for a lot of years. I started it way back in 2008. When I first read about this Merrymount Colony, I knew I needed to write a story there. But I struggled to find the right direction with it. Like I had some good characters and all that kind of stuff, and I had the backdrop of the history, and I knew
Mm.
what had to happen when, but actually getting a story to work was a struggle. So about this time last year, I sent it off to an editor, Hannah Venville's Osprey. She's fantastic. Anyone listening, she's a great editor. And I basically just said, help me know what the story wants to be.
Oh,
And she did. And quite surprisingly to me, she came back and said, this story wants to be a love story. It's like, really?
that's your first,
But
isn't it?
yeah, but she was absolutely right. It did want to be a love story. So I took out an entire subplot at her recommendation, which is not something I usually do. But I took out this entire subplot and I kind of reframed everything as the love story between Noah and Jimmy. And surprise, it worked. It just worked. So
All
she
right,
was absolutely right.
love it.
Mhm.
Let's first introduce people to what Marymount was so that we
Sure.
can put your story there.
Yeah. So this also is one of my only novels that contains a lot of real life people. I don't usually like to do that. I like to write fictional characters. But colonial New England, especially in the 1620s, was a very small, compact society. So there was just no avoiding that.
Mhm.
So the main one is Thomas Morton. He was late 40s, an eccentric, very free spirited lawyer from London. And he had recruited a bunch of young men from Bristol to populate this colony for him. And they were indentured servants. And he had a business partner, Captain Wollaston. And they come and they establish this colony. And over the course of several years, to make some profit, Captain Wollaston sells off a lot of the boys to the tobacco plantations in Virginia, which very much angers Morton, and it's a source of conflict between them. And eventually, he talks the remaining boys into kicking Captain Wollaston and his agents out, and they establish a kind of egalitarian commonwealth. where everybody shared everything, and they erected an 80-foot maypole, which is just incredible, 80 feet.
That's
And they had all these
huge.
drunken revels around them, which they described as bacchanalia, and it just sounded like a really fun place. And it thrived for about 4 years, and then the Puritans suppressed it. So I do want to caveat, this is not a romance, because the history would not let me have the classic happily ever after ending that a romance requires. Sadly, the colony was suppressed. It was burned to the ground. Thomas Morton was arrested. Everybody else was scattered. So no happily ever after per se. But I did want to write the ending that was hopeful, kind of happy-ish, I suppose. The characters are together, spoiler, at the end. And it kind of is hopeful. And what I was aiming for is showcasing a kind of quiet triumph of the queer will in the face of oppression.
Nice. So who are the main characters in the love story?
So Noah Bancroft is a young man from England who has been caught in a compromising position and sent off to the New World by his parents, who want nothing more to do with him. And then Jimmy Hawkey is a young native man who was the sole survivor of his community during the massive pandemics they had there in 1616 and 1617. And he's been raised by a Cornish fisherman. And so he thoroughly speaks English, is kind of anglicized, but still native at the same time. So that was kind of an interesting character to explore. And naturally, Noah and Jimmy, when they meet, there are sparks that fly, and they are late adolescent boys, so things happen.
Perfect. Do you have a puritanical enemy in the book?
I do, yeah. His name is Jonathan Cheswick, and this is a fictional character I wrote up, and his backstory was the subplot I cut. And so I did kind of put it together as its own little novella. If anyone is interested in reading it, it is available for free from a link at the back of the book. You do have to sign up for my newsletter, but you can read that story. It's called The Reformer's Tale, because that's how he saw himself. He was a reformer. Of course, we see him as an oppressor, but villains are always the hero of their own story.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. All right.
And it's interesting too, because there were other colonies. People are sometimes surprised when you find out Massachusetts was one of the first that started to give us the rights and stuff. But that actually has a basis in history, because John Winthrop and his crew actually did perform same-sex civil unions, not quite marriage, but it was treated the same way by the community. So it wasn't an unheard of thing, back in the day. So it is quite astounding when you find some of these things in history that don't necessarily play to what we were all given in our 10th 11th grade history books that we had to study in school. You know, it truly is amazing how queerdom did thrive in some of the most bleakest of places.
Right. And it's all in your point of view too. The Puritans saw themselves as merciful because they still frowned on actual same-sex sex, and that was still illegal and punishable, but they refused to install capital punishment against it, which was the norm in England. You would be hanged and castrated. And they refused to do that. They just put people in prison, and they saw that as merciful. So it's all in your point of view.
Other questions, Bass?
No, it sounds fascinating to me. Is it something that after you had direction and you knew where you were going to go with it, did it warm up to this style of writing, or is this something that's just a one-off, you wanted to get it done and now it's off the bucket list?
Well, yeah. So one of my half-finished projects from last year was set in 1665 Port Royal, Jamaica, and it was centered around the buccaneer culture there.
The Buccaneer, yes.
And I had intended it as an action-adventure story, kind of Treasure Island, but with gay characters, And when I got about halfway through it and abandoned it last spring, it was starting to turn into a love story. I was like, oh, why are you doing this to me? Why?
Why must I have a heart?
Right? This is supposed to be killing and buccaneers and drinking and
buckling of the swashes.
Right. Yeah. All of that. And instead, it's turning into a love story with a little bit of Buccaneer stuff in the background. But
Nice.
no,
So, with Of Wild and Merry Men, was there something you wanted to add that I didn't think to ask?
oh gosh. There is real reason to believe that there was same-sex activity at Merrymount. Um, William Bradford, who was the governor of Plymouth, wrote extensively and disapprovingly of Merrymount in his diaries over the years, and he, complained about their drinking and dancing and fornication and consorting
General
with native
debauchery.
women. But he ended that with saying, "and worse practices," which, is very literally the sin that must not be named. He's not
Right.
naming it. And then Thomas Morton himself wrote a memoir a decade or so later in which he referred to the young men of his colony as Ganymedes, which, if anybody's familiar with Greek mythology, Ganymede was a young man who was the lover of Zeus.
Hmm.
So it was kind of coded language for anyone educated who knew Greek mythology. And he made many references to his revels being bacchanalia, which, in ancient Rome were kind of drunken orgies where
Right.
everybody did everything to everybody. And so there's pretty sound evidence that there was a lot of same-sex activity at Merrymount. So I feel like I was on pretty sound footing putting a gay
Oh,
love story there.
Nice. Love it.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Is there anything else you want folks to know before we preview this year's Get to Know You questions?
I don't think so. Let's have at it.
All right. Take it away, Baz.
all right. So here's our list of getting to know our authors on a completely different level. What in that vein, what's your favorite writing snack or drink
Probably coffee. I love coffee.
in all
All
its
times of
forms?
day.
Yeah, right,
Yes.
right, right, right. Okay. What books did you grow up reading?
The Hardy Boys, and that was one of my favorites. And I think at about the same time period, also, I got through the entire Black Stallion series.
Okay, excellent. Well, who's been the biggest supporter of your
My husband, David,
writing? Yeah,
definitely.
yeah,
Definitely.
we got to give it up to our partners because they put up with a
Yeah.
lot.
Oh, and this takes a lot of time. So,
Uh-huh.
they're very understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. Are you a morning person or a night owl?
Night owl, 100%.
That laugh was everything.
Oh, and thank God I did not marry a morning person either. We were both night owls, and so that's awesome.
Yeah, same here. I fully get you. All right. I got to move my cat because she's blocking the list. What's your favorite hobby outside of writing?
This is kind of a tough one, because I have, I guess, sort of hobbies. Like, we enjoy gardening and hiking. Like, if we ever go on vacation anywhere, we always want to go hiking somewhere. We like boating. I don't know that any of those are really hobbies, but
Yeah,
well,
no,
we like them.
yeah,
Hmm.
no,
Hmm.
absolutely. All right. Has writing and publishing a book changed the way you see yourself?
This is another really tough one, guys. I don't think so. Um, I probably should ask my husband, actually. He would have had a completely different
Yeah,
perspective on it.
probably. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's hard to see these things in ourselves, but I don't think so. But who
Okay.
knows?
All right. Well, if you were to write a spin-off about a side character, which one would you pick?
It would be Jonesy from the Death in Shanghai series. And I did actually write a short story from his point of view, which is a free download to anyone who signs up for a newsletter. That is one of the things that they get. It's kind of a longish short story. It's 7,500 words. It's I have given some thought to doing a novel from his point of view, actually, probably after he leaves Shanghai. I'm going to wrap up the Death in Shanghai series through Doug's point of view, but Jonesy would be a fun one. He's a little bit cynical, but he's got a heart of gold, and it would just be a fun thing to do a spinoff, I think.
Excellent, excellent. Well, have you ever traveled as research for a book?
Not specifically, no. I have set books in places I've been, though. I spent an entire semester in France when I was in college, and I have made sure to put things at villages I've actually been to, which is kind of fun to do. I can draw on that memory.
Yeah, cool. All
Hmm.
right.
Sadly, I've never been to Shanghai.
All right. Well, and the way things are going in China, may not
Yeah.
be a new visit on the horizon. How do you celebrate when you finish a book?
I don't really celebrate when I finish writing it, but when I publish a book, we have a nice dinner. It's
Ah,
kind
there
of
you go.
a muted celebration. But yeah, we'll have a nice dinner.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, you made it through this year's list. Bravo.
Yay!
Even the tough ones. Nicely
Yeah.
done. So you've teased us a bit with some upcoming works. Book 5 in the Death in Shanghai series.
Yes.
Another historic romance with the Buccaneers.
Mhm.
Love story. I'm sorry, not going to say romance. Love story.
Yeah, because I can't guarantee an absolutely happy ending, but maybe. I don't know.
Well, you know,
'cause-
that's where queer romance comes in because
Right.
we have all kinds of different endings in those.
Yes, we do. Yeah,
So,
we
yes.
like to rewrite the book on things.
Mm-hmm.
No pun
That's what
intended.
we
I
do
didn't mean
best.
that.
So prior to the interview, you did say that this was your year of finishing up projects. Did you have others that you wanted to share?
Yeah. So I don't tend to write things straight through from start to finish. I know that's supposed to be a no-no for writers, but I've always kind of left things halfway, put them away for a little while, worked on something else, and then come back to them eventually. And that just kind of works for me. So I always, at any given time, will have one or two kind of half-finished manuscripts in the drawer that I'm going to come back to. It just kind of worked out at the end of 2023. I had 4 half-finished
Wow.
manuscripts. So that is my task for 24, is I'm going to finish these 4 manuscripts, which, you know, if everything goes well, it'll be a really productive year.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Are you talking about the other 2 or not quite yet?
Sure. I have one that is an action adventure set in 16th century France around the religious wars they had then. And it's maybe 80-90% finished. So I think it really actually is an action adventure tale. It's not a love story in disguise. And then for my NaNoWriMo project in November, National Novel Writing Month, I decided to write a novel about the female spies of Civil War Richmond.
Ooh.
Because, you know, what I've written so far is just not ambitious enough. I have to tackle a Civil War now.
Right.
So, you know, yeah. And this one is showing signs that it really wants to be an epic, like one of those big door stoppers we used to have way back in the day,
The
like
James
Gone with the
Mitcheners.
Wind, or
Yeah.
Mhm.
you know, like the North and South novel, which was, you know, 900 pages. This
Yeah.
seems like it may want to be that. It's got a very ensemble cast, more than I initially intended. And I will say I have learned books are like children. You can try to frame them and give them a little direction, but they are going to be what they want to be. And if you try to force them into a box, bad things happen. So, yeah.
Very true. What social or website is best for people to interact with you?
I'm actually not very active on social media and happy about that.
Oh, yes.
Oh my gosh, boy, when I put away social media, it's so freeing. It's
Mhm.
incredibly, it improves the mood in so many
And your
ways.
phone becomes a phone again.
Right? Yeah. Amazing. Amazing. But I do have a presence on Facebook where from time to time I will post vintage photos of my settings, because that's really kind of the best place to do that.
Mhm.
Technically, I have Twitter, but we're not even going to talk about, or X. We won't even talk about that now. Really, the best place to keep up with me is on my website, which is www.garretthutson.com. And it's Garrett with 2 R's and 2 T's, and Hutson is Hutson. And there's links there to all of my books, as well as a link to sign up for my newsletter. And then I send out a monthly newsletter letting people know what I'm up to.
Perfect. Any final words of wisdom?
I don't know that I'm very wise. I don't know, whatever you're doing, keep doing it and make 2024 the best year yet. It just keeps getting better.
Awesome.
Well, we hope.
Yeah. But that's the thing. Keep the hope.
Yeah,
Keep
there
the
you
hope.
go. There you go.
There it is. All right, folks, we'd like to extend a huge thank you to Garrett Hutson for joining us today. Garrett, thank you so much for coming back.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Our pleasure. We at Written on the Edge are proud to introduce you to new media by queer content creators. So if you enjoy learning about new artists or hearing our thoughts on entertainment media, or, you know, seeing Baz and Albert react to film and television, follow us on the YouTube. Like, subscribe, do all the bells and whistles. This show was produced by Row Ravens Media. For disclaimers and links to social media, visit our site, www.rotepodcast.com. Tune in the rest of this year for your queer media fix.
Bye now.
Oh, what's there? Closing time. bum's rush and melody, dear.